Welcome everybody to the little things, and I call it the little things because I'm going to define here in a minute what the big things in nature photography are, and then but I think the one of the things that makes a lot of difference in your pictures are those little things that you think about each and every time, and like I say here in nature photography, details matter, and so we're going to talk about some of those details that I try to pay attention to every single time I go out and take pictures, and I think it makes a big difference. Like I said, or if you don't know who I am, my name's Russell Graves. I'm coming to you live from Hackberry Farm, Dodge City, Texas. Uh, Getting ready to go out on our next workshop pretty soon. We're going to be in the Netherlands, and so I'm pretty excited about that one. In the meantime, just enjoying a beautiful spring day here on the farm and enjoying the time I'm going to spend with you guys. And so bear with me. We still got people wanting to come in here. So, all right, as we get started, speaking of the Netherlands, there's some of the tulips from last year. Just a beautiful, beautiful place. I can't say enough good things about the Netherlands. If you've never been, whether you go with me or go on your own or go with someone else, you need to. If you love flowers and you love just a really well put together country, that's the place to go to. All right. In this webinar, you're going to learn a few things. Number one, you're going to look at. We're going to tell you about five sometimes overlooked aspects in the practice of nature photography. Like I said, I'll call them the little things, but there really are big things. Uh, and then better than that, practical advice on how you can utilize some of these things into your photography. So I'm always trying to be big on that. I always tell you, try to identify what the issue is or the problem is, and then I also want to give you some concrete solutions that you can add to your toolbox as soon as we get off this webinar. You can put these things into practice and immediately start making a difference on how your pictures look. Now, here's the thing I think about all the time when I think about webinars and doing educational stuff. When it comes to photography, there's there's an infinite number of pictures you can take. There's an infinite number of scenes you can see. Everyone has their own vision of what things ought to look like. But when it comes to the nuts and bolts photography, there's really I'm not going to say it's completely finite, but it's pretty close to a finite number you can think about. Kind of that nuts and bolts, sort of the how does aperture work? How does shutter speed work? How does ISO work? The exposure triangle. How do all those things work in concert together? There's only so many ways you can go over that. So a lot of the things that I talk about, this one included, this topic included, is uh, sort of a mindset. Sort of, these are going to be some specific things, but also sort of a mindset to help you think about taking pictures differently. That's really for me that that's been key for me as I've grown through my photographic journey over the years is the way I used to think about what a good picture looked like in the beginning has morphed over time. And is the way that is your definition of a good picture morphs and the things you need to do to make that good picture morphs, all of a sudden you start developing what, artists know as a style. When people look at your pictures, there's a few key indicators that, just like when speaking of the Netherlands, when you look at a Dutch painter like Rembrandt, you can kind of see by his style and be able to tell that that may be a Rembrandt photo. And it's the same way with photographers as you develop a certain style and a certain look of pictures and you repeat those same things over and over again. That's where, that's where your style starts to shine through. And so in that vein, that's some of the things we're going to talk about today, or some of the things that I do uh, from a practical standpoint and a stylistic standpoint, some of the things that I do to kind of lend that style look to my photos. Not to say you've got to copy the way I do things, but again, just a different way of thinking about some of these things and some of the behind the scenes look at some of the things that I do and the secret sauce that I do to put together some of my pictures. And of course, when we do workshops, some of the things I try to coach people on if they're looking for some different suggestions or coaching ideas on how to make their pictures stand out a little bit. And I got a few bonus tips for you in the end. So I start with five little things you're going to learn, but as I went through this, I have a few other bonus tips I'll share with you. Still got people coming in, so I'll pause every now and then and let those folks in. So in nature photography, paying attention to the small details often pays big dividends. And in a picture like this, I mean, I've taken a lot of pictures of burrowing owls before. This is in Florida. one of the small things I paid attention to, and I'll talk about this a little bit in a minute, is just the angle that you in which you shoot the picture. That's a huge thing. On this one, I used all the technology I have in terms of a articulating screen on the back. Got the camera as low as I could get it to try to get eye level with these owls, which by the way, they're only about that tall, and really tried to pay attention to those small things like, the angle of the camera to the bird and the background and the lighting and all those things. And those small things add up and they pay big dividends in the end. If you've ever if you've ever entered a photography contest, you'll know a lot of times when it comes down to picking the final pictures and who the winners are, you're really slicing hairs and you're to try to splitting hairs to try to see who, to try to pick one picture over another and which is best. And a lot of times it's some of these details that we're going to be talking about. As always, I just like to show pictures in between time to kind of give me a moment to regroup my thoughts and think about things. These are all pictures from various workshops we did last year, except for the owl that was here on the farm last year. And it's getting to be owl season again, and the owls are starting to come out, so we're pretty excited about that. And so before I talk about the little things that this webinar is about, let's talk about the big things. And the big things in my mind that everybody should know when you get to a certain level of advancement of photography. Now, if you're brand new to it, I don't expect anybody to know this because like everything else, photography comes with a learning curve. But as you get comfortable and you start investing in new equipment and you start investing in trips and experiences and everything else, there's a few things that I call the big things in photography that you ought to know. And number one is an understanding of exposure. How does shutter speed work? How does aperture work? How does ISO work? And how do all three work in concert together? How do you arrive at that? And it's a nebulous concept to explain. Believe me, I've tried every way in the world to come up with some simple ways of explaining some of these things. And the truth is, there's not. Everyone hears things differently. Everyone understands things differently. And it's hard to come up with a one size fits all explanation of the way of why if you're talking about stopping down on a lens while the number gets smaller instead of larger, why opening up is a smaller number, stepping down is a smaller number. It's some of those things. I've often jokingly said if I can ever invent a time machine, the first thing I'm going to do is go back and find the guy that invented all these photography terms and give him a good talking to in the end. Uh, just because some of these things that we talk about can be a little confusing. But at some point, everyone gets to the point where they understand exposure. They understand what's going to happen when you change the aperture on the lens. They understand, what shutter speed you should use to capture birds in flight or to capture slow water moving. And then they understand they have a good concept of ISO to get the highest quality pictures. And so these are the big things again. No, number two, an understanding of composition. Now, I watched the Masters yesterday. I've always been a fan of that golf tournament, and I try to watch at least the final round every year. And I watched a little bit of it yesterday, and it doubles down with what I've always said about photography, nature photography in general. It's like golf in the sense that the greatest golfers in the world play the game, and none of them played it perfectly yesterday. Some of them got close, but none of them played it completely perfectly. Uh, and so we play the game knowing that you'll never master composition. You may get better at it. And I certainly have gotten better at it, especially when it comes to composition of not only wildlife photos, but people in nature photos and landscape photography and all that. But there's still some things I struggle with from time to time, but at least have an understanding of composition. And I kind of know where to start when I find myself in the area and I'm getting ready to take pictures. So that's what I mean by understanding composition. And then proper camera handling techniques. There's a right way and a wrong way to hold your camera. Uh, and I'm going to be a dinosaur on this topic one of these days, but I still believe the best way to hold a camera is using a tripod, especially if you're using a telephoto lens. If you're shooting wide angle lenses and you're doing landscape photography, I think there's another reason you should use a tripod is that it helps slow you down and think about compositional things. But there's a right way and a wrong way to hold a camera. If you're hand holding it, there's a proper way of, we've all learned to cradle your left hand underneath the lens to give it support, keep your elbows in. So that's another big thing of understanding. And then knowing camera operations. This is different for every camera. I'm an advocate of telling people You don't have to know everything your camera will do. In fact, on my, these cameras that we use now, these mirrorless cameras are technological wonders. But if you've got a pretty good understanding of the things you use the most and where to find them and how to change it from continuous autofocus to spot autofocus, or how to change it your focus point, or how to change it from uh, uh, just a single picture to burst mode, and understand all those camera operations. That's a big thing too. I think, especially if you're going out taking pictures of a variety of things, it's important to know how your camera operates. Don't have to know everything it does. Like there's some things on my camera I have no clue, and I keep telling myself I'm going to have to look that up and see what that means. But there's a few things on my camera I have no clue what it means just because I don't use it, so there's no point in me wasting time to figure it out. Now, there's some other things I kind of use on the periphery. Focus stacking, I know how to do that. HDR when I need it and all those things. So there's a few things that I keep on the periphery I know how to do, but the basics of the camera operation, knowing how to change modes, knowing how to change all the basic settings in your camera is big as well. And then I think this is big too, a consistent post-processing workflow. Every time I bring my pictures into the computer after I'm home on a shoot, about 90% of them get the exact same thing done to them each and every time. I mean, it's just pretty consistent. So I know I'm going to hit auto. I'm probably going to have to adjust the exposure and the blacks and the whites a little bit. And then after that, there's not a whole lot else that goes on, but it's just a consistent workflow that I do every single time. That way, when you're in the field, it helps you predict what you can do in post-processing, so you can be able to know, can I capture this picture and make it look good in the end? And then number two, you get better at taking pictures by going out and taking pictures. And so a consistent post-processing workflow means you got a good starting point, you got a good ending point, and you kind of know what you're going to do from there. And a lot of people have that already. And the post-processing workflow is it's one of those things that everybody does it different. No one necessarily does it right or wrong. There's just everyone's different way of doing it, and so I think there's some space to understand that as well. This was a beautiful morning out at Death Valley National Park. When we went out there this year, we really hit it good because the uh, Super Bloom was underway because it had an ample amount of rain in the wintertime. And then Badwater Basin, the lowest point in the national park and in the continental U.S., was now Lake Manly because it had water in it. So we were able to get some beautiful reflections, and just a lot of good things went on with that particular trip.
Russell,
Hey,
I'm not seeing any of your pictures. I'm just seeing you.
uh-oh, I'm not sure why that's going on because when we did a check earlier, everyone was
We're
seeing
still, yeah, I've still got your
I've
presentation.
got your pictures.
Okay,
I can see your screen.
okay. Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on there. So, uh, yeah, I'm not sure.
Suggest
I
you
can
log
see
in
your
again.
pictures. It's
Yeah,
Carolyn
maybe
Davis.
maybe log off and log back in. Whoever said that you couldn't see the pictures, so maybe try that.
It's Lee Hatfield.
Okay.
Couldn't,
Yeah.
can't see him.
Huh.
All right,
Oh,
I'll log off and come back on.
okay. All right. Number one, little thing, watch the edges. And I have to remind myself of this all the time. And what I mean by watch the edges is when you're taking a landscape picture, a wildlife picture, I've always got to be mindful of making sure that little things aren't creeping in from the side. And I say this here, when composing image, try to avoid extraneous objects creeping into the edge of the frame, things like limb, out of place rocks, etc. When I judge contests, you'd be surprised at how much I see this a lot. And so a lot of the things I'll talk about, the little things, are just things I've experienced that every one of them I've done myself. So I'm not going to say I'm so good at what we're talking about today that that I've never done these myself. I've done them all myself. And so when we when we're composing images, just be on the lookout of all those little extra little things kind of creeping into the frame, like another animal that you're going to chop off, or like a limb or a rock that kind of looks like out of place. I'm going to show you some examples in a minute where I'll chop rocks off, or you may chop a tree off, or whatever. But it's kind of hard to for me to explain. But there's a balance, and so this is the way I like when I do landscape images. I like really clean edges where the sky is where the sky is supposed to be, the ground is where the ground's supposed to be. This is at White Sands National Park, by the way. uh, and just have it really clean looking, So when you compose something like this, there's yuccas everywhere out there. So you're making sure there's no yuccas kind of sticking into the picture. You're making sure that, all the angles of the light are right. You're just making sure that it's got a really clean kind of background around it. This was in uh, Acadia National Park. And again, because of just the way the rocks on the bottom balance with the shadows of the mountains in the background, and we got that little bit of color. That's why I made the compositional choice there. But if you notice that very bottom rock, I really tried carefully not to cut it off. But some of the rocks are cut off. Sometimes you got to make those choices. And the best thing I know to tell you is when you're making those choices, just kind of do what looks natural. But if you look at the rest of this frame, the water's clean, the mountains are clean. There's not anything just uh, inadvertently sticking in from the side. And then number two. This is one of the things that I really, really preach a lot. I mean, this is because I've got this speaks to my style when I shoot wildlife pictures. I've got such a affinity for nice looking backgrounds like this one. I try to tell people all the time to pay attention to the background. Little thing number one is pay attention, watch the edges, make sure limbs or other stuff aren't sticking in. I don't think I finished my thought a while ago, but again, on the watch the edges. You'd be surprised that, or you may not be surprised that when I judge photo contests for photo clubs or wherever else, how many people just, they're not paying attention and you get something stray creeping into the image, which again, when you get to the end and you're trying to select really the best of six different images, you're looking for little things like that to try to say this one's better than that one. And so that the little things are often, like I said, the little things that just people you may not be paying attention to. And then little thing number two, pay attention to the background. A background like this is a bobwhite quail calling from a fence post. This is in the spring out in the Texas Panhandle just a few years ago. And I just love the way backgrounds like that look. Really soft, really creamy. They help the subject stand, they help the subject pop out from the background. And so every chance I get, I'm looking for opportunities to shoot pictures of wildlife with backgrounds like this. And there's a way of doing it. And so a good background can add a bunch of appeal to an image. In fact, I mean, I don't expect anyone to really be involved in this. If you've got any questions on how to do it, I'd love to answer it. I'm an open book when it comes to that. But this picture right here is my latest magazine cover. Came out this month in a magazine, and the reason I knew it was going to be a cover the minute I took it, and I had people there with me that can vouch for me that when I took that picture, I said that may be the best quail shot I've ever taken. It'll be on the cover of a magazine one day. Paid attention to the background. The subject matter is beautiful all in itself. The background is just it's a secondary player in the scene. And so it really doesn't matter as much. And because it's got a really clean background, they were able to put the name of the magazine across the top above the quail's head. They were able to put all the information they needed to in the dead space, and the quail still stood out and really helped carry that magazine cover. And so here's a simple explanation of things I look for when I'm talking about backgrounds. And so if you look at example one, you can see the camera there, then the turkey, and then the trees in the background are pretty close to the turkey. You follow me so far? And then example two, camera's in the same spot, turkey's in the same spot, but the background is further away. Now, usually if I get a chance, I try to pick example number two. If I've got a choice at all to make in a picture, I usually try to figure out a way to make the background be as far away from the subject as I can. Because when you do that, that's how you get those really soft backgrounds like you saw in the previous picture or the previous two pictures. You get backgrounds like that. The background is relatively far away from the subject, and because of a couple of camera settings I'll go over in a minute, then you get those really, really, really soft out of focus backgrounds like that. The uh, if there was a bush right behind that quail, that bush wouldn't be very much out of focus. And so a lot of times, well, let me save that thought for just in a minute. Let me go through this first. And so background softness, here's my best way of explaining it, is the function between the distance from you to the subject and the distance of the subject to the background. So in example one, the background wouldn't be as out of focus as what it would in background two. And then it's also the further the subject is from the background, the softer the background becomes when using a wide open aperture. And that's the key. A wide open aperture, f4, f5.6, whatever, f6.3, whatever your lens will do. If you open it wide open and you seek those backgrounds like that, then you get the results like I showed you in the previous two pictures. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, how in the world can I make the background move? There's just no way of doing it. And it's true, you can't. But if you're doing backyard hummingbird setups or songbird setups, you can choose where you put, your feeders and then have them relatively far from the back fence or the background of the bushes in the back of your yard or wherever else, and be able to manipulate where the background is whenever you're taking pictures. A lot of times, and you may or may not be surprised to hear this, a lot of times when you're in the outdoors, uh, if you'll just do a couple of simple things, sometimes I'm thinking about we've got someone in the webinar today that was with me on the Smoky Mountains trip last spring, about a year ago, and we saw a bear in the field. And from one angle, you didn't get that good clean background, but if you move 5 feet to the left, you could change the background just because it's a different perspective of where you're standing. You change the background, and then the background becomes a whole lot softer. So a lot of times it may be just moving yourself left or right just a little bit, or it may just be moving yourself just down. If you go to I think about a time when I was in Yellowstone a few years ago, and there was a bear on the side of the road, and every single photographer there was standing up taking pictures of it, and they were shooting pictures of this bear on a down angle, a slightly down angle, wasn't much. And then all we had to do just to get a different background and get a different look in the picture was sit down on the ground, just get lower. And so we didn't have to change our perspective by much, but we just had to change our perspective because sometimes when you do move left, move right, the background distance and relative to the animal sometimes will move away. So always be on the lookout for that kind of stuff too. Now, I'll be the first to admit sometimes you have no control over it. I think there was a picture early on. Let me go back and find it of that toucan. And that's a good illustrative picture too of the toucan in Costa Rica. Uh, you know, I would have loved it if that tree wasn't right behind it, but the toucan landed where the toucan was going to land, and so we took it anyway because it's a beautiful bird. But you can see in that example right there how the tree immediately behind the toucan is more in focus, but as you get to those trees back behind the toucan that are in the distance, see how they become out of focus? And it's just it's a difference between the relative distance between the you and the subject from the background. And so always be on the lookout for how you can line yourself up differently and be able to achieve a lot cleaner backgrounds. And again, and that's just what I was telling you. That's a stylistic look. Let me get back to the pictures where we were earlier. That's a stylistic look. But if I'm ever judging a picture and I see backgrounds like that, would someone made the conscious effort to do that? I'm kind of a sucker for pictures like that and backgrounds like that. And I'm a sucker for Bob Quill as you can see too. Okay, let me catch us back up to where we were. And again, if you have any questions as I go along, feel free to put them in the chat or wait till the end and you can turn on your audio and ask them. Got to get a drink of coffee. Yeah, here's another good example. Tree frog on a flower. You can tell here I use really shallow depth of field. I just like that look where one eye is in focus, but the far eye is not. And that's okay to me. As long as that near eye that's looking at you is in focus, that's all I was really worried about. And then if you look at the toes of the tree frog, it's out of focus as well. And so that picture right there, now this was a controlled situation. This was a macro setup we did. And so you were able to move around to the frog and get the kind of background you wanted. In this case, I got the guy to set up the flower and set up the frog where you could achieve this look pretty easily. But again, it's just being mindful of how far the background is away from the subject. And this is out at Redlands Ranch. We do a reptile experience when we do that workshop, and this was one of the snakes we photographed. But again, I actually put in a mound of dirt with rocks on it, made a habitat. So if we did do rattlesnake pictures, we could set the rattlesnake on top of of the uh, the mound, and then you could shoot it with a really clean background like this, but you're also shooting it where you're not having to lay down and get eye level with it. We bring the snakes up eye level to you, and so that way you get these good soft backgrounds. But everything about that background, when I designed where that mound of dirt was going to be and knowing what we're going to use it for, was designed so you could accomplish that kind of background. I had to, because the trees are probably 50, 60, 70 yards in the distance, and you're able to get that really soft, kind of creamy background. So of all the things I talk about today, of the five things, and I think we're only on number two right now, of all the things I talk about today, this one right here, I think will add the biggest amount of pop to your photos. If you just keep this piece in mind whenever you're shooting wildlife pictures and always thinking about the background and always thinking about what's the background going to look like, don't accept what you have. Move left, move right, get lower, maybe even get a little higher if you need to. But either way, as long as you're thinking about the background and shooting with a wide open aperture, you can achieve stuff like this as well. And little thing number three, angle of light is it's everything. There's I'll get into this a little more in a minute, but we're taught when we first go through photography 101, we're taught a certain way to think about light and think about the angles of light and how it affects your photography. But I think as you get more advanced, uh, you start thinking more and more about the angle of light. Again, with wildlife photos, uh, you can't always predict it, but you can at least kind of plan with the end result in mind. That's another thing I talk to people a lot is when you get to the point where you're doing your photography intentional, where you're planning with the end in mind. This is the kind of picture I think if I make my settings this way and the light is this way and I think about composition and all my settings, this is the kind of picture I'll come out with in the end. So when you think about the end in mind, it really does affect what you feel like you can and cannot accomplish when you're in the field. And so the angle of light can really affect the feel of an image. And so this is how we're all taught right here, front lighting. And then front lighting is a technique we all learned in the beginning. Keep the sun at your back, or in other words, what I teach people in the beginning is if you're looking for the best angle of light when you're in the field, if you've got, let's say you're in Yellowstone and you got some elk out in the field and they're not real scared of you and you can move wherever, what I always try to tell people to do is point your shadow at the subject. That way the sun's right at your back, the sun's falling directly on that animal. It's the most purest front lighting you can get. And that works really well all the time. And also teaches you something else. If you're pointing your shadow at the subject, that tells you instinctively the best two times a day to shoot pictures when you're shooting in full sunlight is either in the morning, first couple hours in the morning when you can make a long shadow, or the last couple hours of the evening when you can make a long shadow. But front lighting, again, is how we're all taught. It's a beautiful way of illuminating a subject. This is a lesser prairie chicken, by the way, in the Texas Panhandle. It's a beautiful way of illuminating the subject. The shadows tend to fall away from the animal. You get a whole lot of detail. You get the catch light in the eye. That checks a whole lot of boxes. But as we all know in nature, it's not the only way of doing things. And so a couple other lighting scenarios I want you to be aware of and be willing to embrace whenever the opportunity arises, because I think at least one of them is a really good missed opportunity. There's another front lighting. This is mainly front lighting. This is a goose coming in at Bosque del Apache. Uh, just again, illuminated front lighting. The background's a good distance from the subject, so you get that really soft out of focus background. And it's not what I like about this background, because I had a bunch of pictures from which to choose to put here. But what I like about that is how the blue and the gray, the gray of the mountains and the blue of the sky are just broken up. It's not just a blue sky image. I always like pictures like that. And then side lighting. Side lighting is a good technique to use for landscape photography. And I say that because, we're taught to keep the sun at our back a lot of times. But as you know, if you're trying to keep the sun at your back and it's your last couple hours of the day, and you're trying to do landscape pictures, a lot of times your shadow will be in the shot. And so you have to do side lighting at that point. And this was out at Racetrack Playa in Death Valley National Park, where the rocks, uh, They used to say they'd mysteriously move through the across this playa, but they scientists say they came up with an explanation. But I, I'm going to be a little. I don't know much about it, but I'm still not buying their explanations because there's still a whole lot of questions I have about these rocks and why they mysteriously move across this dry lake bed that's out in the middle of the desert. And so with this one, when we were out there back in February, it was I told everybody consider side lighting because number one, using that shadow to help shape the objects that you see in the frame. So in other words, instead of the shadow falling cleanly away from the subject and you never seeing it, we wanted to see the shadow in the subject. So we side lighted this one. And so you see the mountains that are side lit in the distance, you see the rock that's side lit in the foreground. And then there's another thing it does that side lighting helps give definition to the edges of that track and the edges of those octagonal cracks that are in the mud there. And it just adds a little more visual interest. It's a little thing, and that's why I call it the little things. But when you start thinking along ways like this, and if you when you start thinking along these pathways like I'm talking about, then it's those little things a lot of time that adds up that really adds interest to the picture. So consider side lighting as well. Front lighting is how we always learn. Side lighting is a good technique as well. And then this is a side lit picture. This is in Cades Cove in Smoky Mountain National Park. Uh, this is a morning scene. Sun's coming up to our left, side lighting this lane. Just a beautiful, beautiful shot. Iconic. It's, this is Sparks Lane in Cades Cove in Great Smoky Mountain National Park. And so, good iconic scene. A lot of people have taken the scene, and every time we're there, when we see it, we take it because it's a beautiful example of side lighting. Just helps to add definition and a little bit of a drama to a scene that otherwise, if it was front lit, it may be a little more flat, may not be as have the same feel to it. And I don't know how to describe the feel, but I think you understand what I'm talking about there. And then backlighting. This is one technique that uh, I've been doing a workshop for the past 4 or 5 years called Cowboys and Canyonlands, and it's been a remarkably popular workshop. But one of the things that I do in that workshop is I get people out of their comfort zone, and there's some times when I make the cowboys be uh, the sun will be on the other side of the cowboys, so they're backlit on purpose, because it's such a dramatic way of shooting pictures, and these donkeys or these wild burros are backlit. This was out in the California deserts as well. These uh the wild burros are backlit, and it's just a good way of adding rim light to a subject. If you're taking pictures of people, backlighting is a way to go too because it adds a rim light to their hair. Plus, they're not squinting into the sun, uh, and it also adds a little bit of moodiness to an image. You can see here that's another shot of a different rock in that racetrack playa. And on this shot, I really wanted to look like desert and look kind of barren and it wasn't hot that day, but I wanted to kind of impart that feel. And so shot this at f/22 to get the starburst and backlit it. So again, we can use those shadows as part of the scene in the picture. The original picture, that bottom shadow is not cut off of that rock. It's just you had to compress them to fit this slide, to fit the format of this slideshow. And so uh, it's just one of those tools in your toolbox to always be thinking about backlighting. Now, one trick to backlighting, if you ever do it, and this is on the Cowboys and Canyonlands workshop, we had the rider go between us and the sun, and that way all the dust in the air that he was kicking up would all be backlit. It just adds a lot of drama that front lighting cannot, and just adds more interest to your portfolio of images you may take on any particular trip. But the one piece of advice I'll give you on backlighting is make sure you've got something dark in the background. If you've got a bright background like the sky, then you'll either get a silhouette or you won't get a picture as interesting looking. So the key to making backlighting work is just like this. The background is a little dark. If he was against the sky, you can see how blown out the sky is. If he was against the sky, it wouldn't be nearly as dramatic of an image. And even This picture here was shot pretty close to midday. Up in Montana. And even on that one, when we were getting lined up to shoot these bighorn sheep, I told everybody we're going to move to this one location because the animals instinctively knew they didn't want to face the sun, so they've got their back to the sun because they're resting. If they were feeding, they probably would have faced the sun, but because they're resting, they're wanting to relax, and so their back is to the sun. And so we found a spot where we could get the dark trees in the background and be able to use the backlighting technique to really uh, make these pictures work when a lot of times they wouldn't work at all because of the time of day they were in. So just a good tool to have in your toolbox. By the way, my one advice for backlighting, there are a couple different ways to do it. This one here, I wasn't too worried about the detail in it. So we just pretty much shot how the camera decided because that all that orange glow is kind of a neutral tone. But in this one, uh, we had to uh, overexpose just a little bit, just to bring out some detail in the eyes and in the animal. And then little thing number four, consider the angles. I would also say of all the people I've taken out before on these excursions and had these conversations in the field with people like I'm having with you guys right now, I would say one of the things I talk about the most is consider the angles. The angle you're going to shoot the picture from. It's it's pretty easy for me to say that, get low because that's when you're shooting wildlife pictures, it's always best, I think, and I'll enhance this thought in a minute. It's always best if you get eye level or lower. Pretty easy for me to say, but at the same time, I understand the older we all get, the harder it is to get up and down off the ground. In fact, I've got a knee injury, and I get it. I've got a knee injury. I had knee surgery when I was 19, uh, arthroscopic surgery. The thing is coming back to haunt me, and over the past 3 or 4 months, my knee's really been hurting. It hadn't been easy to get up and down off the ground, and so I finally went to the doctor and got that dealt with. Uh, but again, when you can, and if it's possible, consider the angles. And what I mean by angles is really as a starting point, and this isn't universal. Uh, I know people are going to say, "Well, wait a second. I've shot this picture. It's at a different angle. It looked fine." And you're probably you're not. You're probably right. You are right. This is not a universal rule, but it's a good place to start. It's one of those little things to think about when you're out in the field and you're kind of figuring out how do I accomplish my photographic goals and be able to shoot a nice picture. And so for starters, with wildlife, like I said, a low angle is good. But for landscape photography, I usually start with a higher angle. I'll show that in a minute. Landscape photography, this bison, this picture was shot almost a year ago on our Redlands Ranch Wildlife Experience Workshop. Uh, Again, I thought all those things we talked about. This is a little bit overcast, so we didn't have to worry about the angle a lot. This is slightly backlit, uh, as I recall, because no, yeah, because it was more of the middle of the day. I am facing north when I shot this picture because I remember where we were. And so the background's a good distance away. I watch the edges, make sure another uh, move to a spot. And I remember this shot because the first time I tried to shoot this picture of this bull, there was another bison that was kind of creeping in from the left. So I moved just a couple of feet so I could get this shot, this picture of this bison really clean, framed him up like I wanted to, and then shot the picture. And so with sloths, it's easy to get a low angle because they're always up in the trees. But you see what I'm saying? I mean, usually in my mind, again, not universal, but as a good starting point, eye level or below with wildlife is you can hardly ever go wrong with that angle. Because again, if you're at eye level with it, it goes back to choosing your backgrounds. It helps define the way those backgrounds are going to look, as opposed to if you're standing up and looking almost straight down on an animal. You can see there, that's another good example of the layers of the background. We've got the bush close to it. We've got the yucca a little bit further away. Then we've got the other vegetation far off. You can see how as the background gets further away from the animal, from the subject, the background gets more and more blurry. Now, if I had a choice, would I love those yuccas and that one bush to be gone and just get that good clean background in the back? I think I would. But this is the first Texas bear I ever, not the first Texas bear I ever saw, but the first Texas bear I ever photographed. And that was in Big Bend National Park. That was last summer when I was there, just on a scouting trip. Just went out there for fun and looking around, and was able to. My wife actually spotted him where he was on the side of the road, and we're driving around, and just a beautiful, beautiful shot. But try to be mindful of when I shot the picture because I've got control of when I press the button, and I try to wait for him to be in the ideal spot, eye level or lower, shoot the picture. And so on landscape shots, this is in Acadia National Park. I'll usually start with my tripod with like me standing up and try to visualize what it's going to look like. But sometimes I might go a little bit lower. Uh, I have tried shooting pictures of really, really low landscape shots, like across rocks like this, and I'm just not very good at it. So I think for me and the compositions I like, again, wildlife, you start with the angle. I'm going to start at eye level and lower. With landscapes, I'm going to be a little bit higher just to kind of explore and see what it looks like. So I love drone shots. I just love higher angles when it comes to livestock. When it comes to landscape shots, I just love higher angles, and so that's why I tend to start at a higher angle. Again, something to consider. This is a waterfall in Great Smoky Mountain National Park. This is pretty easy to start from a higher vantage point just because that's where the trail leads you. You can get lower, but I think this waterfall looks best because you can see all the details of where the water's flowing from. You can see the details of where the water's flowing out from. You get a lot better view of all the leaves on the rocks around. It's just to me that's a superior composition than one that I've made when I've got lower to the water. And even this one, this is below the big waterfall, but it's above the lower falls. So that's the decision I made. And that's where maybe the little bit of exception to the rule. If I'd have got higher than the big waterfall, you lose detail in the close waterfalls. But uh, because it's all the high waterfall, the low waterfalls, and everything in between. It's an ensemble cast. Everything's important to the picture. And so when I shot this picture, I chose to be just probably about eye level. I'm 5'9", so it's probably standing up and made the composition from there when I shot this picture. And this is a contradiction I didn't know how to get out of today. I say little thing number five, don't forget the verticals, but I led it with a horizontal picture. That's because the uh, my consistency part of me, I always like all the title subjects. They all use the same slide when I'm talking about each particular one. And so on this one, uh, I say consider the verticals, but I had to lead with the horizontal shot. So I hope you'll forgive me there. But on little thing number five, don't forget the vertical because I see this a lot too. This is not number one, but I see a lot of people when they shoot pictures, they tend to always shoot in horizontal format. And, I guess technically you can always go and crop into a vertical, but I've always been of the mindset just try to get it as close as you can to your vision in the field. That saves you on post-processing time in the end, and it just to me it makes the whole process more enjoyable. I'd much rather be outside taking pictures than I would sitting in front of a computer at home. And so as you're out taking pictures, don't forget the verticals. I don't know this for I don't know this to be the absolute truth, but I judged a photo contest a couple of years ago. It had probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 thousand pictures in it to start with that had to cull through and pick the good ones from the bad ones. And I noticed a, a lot of them, especially from the same people, were all horizontal formats with the subject right in the middle. From a technical standpoint and a subject matter standpoint, they weren't bad pictures, but they showed zero regard for composition. And I've wondered often if that's social media's fault. Because with like Instagram, it's a square format and Facebook, I think Facebook you can use the native format from the cameras, but uh, a lot of pictures are just center punch like that. And so one thing I encourage people to do is when you're shooting pictures, landscapes or wildlife, when it's appropriate, shoot vertical images. I think you'll be happy in the end. Like the landscape on the left, I'm gonna have to explain that. That's a comet from about 2 years ago, right at sunset, and those are the Wichita Mountains in southwest Oklahoma, where that is. And so because the comet was vertical and the whole scene was vertical. It just lent itself to a vertical composition. If you shot that horizontal, you're going to lose, unless you shoot it really wide, you may lose part of the tail. That picture on the left was shot with a 70 to 200 millimeter lens. Picture on the right was shot with a 70 to 200 millimeter lens. I'm not gonna lie to you, when I shot that picture, that's a picture I had designed in my mind. What you can't see is the feeder that's it's probably 30 feet from where I sit right now. You can't see the feeder on the right where the hummingbird is going in to feed from. I just knew there was going to be a time of the year where the sun was going to come up over the trees in the distance, and I could get a silhouetted hummingbird as it's going in to feed. And so, what I'm not going to lie to you about is I have cover aspirations for this picture one day. So that's another reason why I shot it vertical. But think about vertical, because sometimes, again on this, if I'd have shot it horizontal, you'd have saw the feeder in the picture. And if I never would have told you a feeder was there, there's a good chance you'd have looked at it and thought, that's the coolest picture ever. I don't know how he did it. You'd never consider there's a feeder there. So I shot it horizontal too to get rid of the feeder. And then more tulips in the Netherlands there. This was using a combination of techniques here. Got the starburst F22, the using the backlighting technique, but with the caveat, use the backlighting technique, but also had one of those 5-in-1 reflectors where we reflected light back into the tulips to be able to get that golden light on them, to be able to not only backlight them, get the starburst, but also get that light being reflected back into there, that golden light. And then you can see there the bighorn sheep. They lent themselves well to a really clean vertical background. And so again, always think about the verticals as well. And then here's your bonus tips as we wind down. It looks like we got about 10 minutes to go till 1 o'clock. So we're still in good shape as far as time is concerned. As always, if you have a lot of questions, I haven't even looked at the chat. I'll stay with you as long as we need to. I'll get to the end of this slide here or end of these slides, and then I'll turn the presentation off. We'll just go to and just have a chat where we can see all of our faces again if you want to be on camera. But here's your bonus ones. More and more, when we're in the field, I try to coach people on taking pictures of people. I think inherently people like taking pictures of people. Again, not universal when I say that, but I think if given a choice, so many of y'all have children, grandchildren, and you just wanted to take better pictures of them when you're outside and when they're doing things. And one of the skills that I learned a long time ago, which helped me professionally, was when I got pretty adept, again, not going to say I was ever the best at it, but when I got fairly adept at taking pictures of people in the outdoors, doing things that people do in the outdoors and looking believable doing it, it's when I started getting hired by some of the biggest companies in the outdoor industry, when I could finally get where I could do that. And so, as a general rule, when you're taking pictures of people, have them do something. I would argue that most people inherently, well, I say that most people my age and older inherently, or maybe a little younger than me and older, inherently don't like to have their pictures made. They didn't grow up in a selfie culture, and so it's not second nature to just take pictures of yourself. Because I can tell you, whenever I'm in a picture, I'm usually the least interesting thing in that picture. Uh, and so most people are a little bit apprehensive about what they're doing, but the advice I give to people is have them do something. When we do the Cowboys in Canyonlands, have them ride a horse, have them mess with the rope, have them do something uh, that takes their mind off what you're doing. And then your role is just to find that good angle, find the good backgrounds, find the good light, angle of light, all those things we talked about, and then put it all together at the end. And so that's always a good tip. And usually if I have to take a portrait of someone, I'll stand there and talk to them for 4 or 5 minutes just to get them comfortable. And I'll really pay attention to how they naturally stand. If they stand like this with their arms crossed, that's someone take their picture. If they stand with their hands in their pocket, that's how I'm going to take their picture. I'm just try to get them comfortable and just say, when you stood that way a while ago, stand that way again. I think that's your best look. And then slowly they get comfortable. And when you have them do something, aside from just stand there and cheese for the camera, you get a lot more natural pictures. And I know this is in the vein of nature photography, but like I say, I think there's a big desire for people to take pictures, people to get better at taking pictures of other people, not just in a studio, really formally lit and formally posed kind of setting, but just people being people doing natural things. With wildlife, I always say wait for a little action. I'm going to go backwards here. And when I say wait for a little action, I'll use this quail picture as an example. That bird's just standing there on that stump, but just the fact that his leg's moving forward, that's the little bit of action I'm talking about. When you see stuff like that happen, always take pictures of it. You know, if his legs were together, it would lack a little bit of dynamics that I like to see in wildlife pictures, but just the fact that leg's a little bit forward, or maybe the both ears are turned your way. Like, let me find it. Like the burrows right there. They at first their ears were backwards, and to me, equines look better. All animals look better if they kind of have that alert look, but equines like a burro, I said, "Hey, burros, what are y'all doing?" Just talked to them a little bit, and they looked at me like that and kind of perked their ears up. They were wild in the sense they weren't being held back by a fence and they could roam wherever they wanted to roam, but they'd seen people before, so I was fairly close to these guys. I was probably uh I don't know, 30 or 40 yards away from them. And you can see almost all these wildlife pictures. You know, they've got somewhat of an alert look, and that's what I mean. Even this bison, his ears, you know, I don't know if bison's ears ever go forward now that I think about it, but the fact that he turned and looked at us and he kind of had that ready stance, I think that makes all the difference in the world. Sloths, it's hard to ever make them look ready. Like this bear, that side eye look the bear gave me, that's that little thing I'm talking about. Look for a little bit of action whenever you shoot the pictures. And even if you're shooting pictures like that anyway, you know, whenever I do these slideshows and I come back and I curate the pictures that I'm going to show y'all, or I'm not necessarily I'm doing show and tell, but the pictures I will include in these presentations, that's the kind of stuff I look for. I look for something, wait for a little bit of action, however that action is defined, and then those are the pictures I'll usually pick. Not all the time, but those are the pictures I'll usually pick to go with it. And then don't overthink the process. That's so much of photography. Nature photography involves the mechanical skills of just setting the camera right and getting all your settings right and the composition right. And this, you know, then you have the that's the controllable stuff. Then you have the uncontrollable stuff, like is the animal going to give you any action to take a picture of? And so a lot of times people get lost in just the process. They're thinking too hard about, well, should I be 800 ISO or 1000 ISO? Well, in the end, yeah, maybe it matters some, but in the big scheme of things, it doesn't really matter. Just pick one and go with it. You know, should I shoot it 1/1000th of a second or 1/2000th of a second? Well, you know, it depends on what you're trying to go for. Even if you shoot at 1/1000th of a second and it blurs the bird's wings a little bit, as long as the eye's in focus, that's really what matters. And so a lot of times I'll find as people are learning, and I've done it too. I don't, this isn't an indictment, but you tend to overthink the process instead of understanding so much of photography. It's like you washing your hair or me washing my beard. It's if you look at the uh, if you look at the directions on the shampoo bottle, it says wash, rinse, repeat. That's a lot of photography. It's the same process over and over again. You're making sure your shutter speed's where it needs to be. You got the ISO you want, you got the aperture you want, and it's just doing the same thing over and over and over again from a technical standpoint. And so again, I tell people all the time, don't overthink the process. Let it happen. Get your settings right. Be confident in your settings. And then just if you make a mistake like we all do, learn from it, move forward, get ready for the next scene that comes up. So don't overthink it. And then I said this earlier, take pictures with the end in mind. I'm always thinking about if I aim my camera at this subject, what do I think I'm going to have in the end? And so again, it's a powerful way of thinking. It's a powerful way of adding that to your process because in the end, uh, I'll go back. This picture of the tulips right there, that's a perfect example of thinking with the end in mind. This was a picture that a lot of the people in the group took. I was showing them how to do this, but I knew how cool it would look if you got the starburst and then you still had some detail in some colorful detail in the flowers. And so with, with the reflector in place and instructing everybody shoot at f/22 and shoot at a low angle, I'll hold the reflector there for you. It was thinking with the end in mind, thinking, okay, this is what I want to try to accomplish in the end. And when you do that, it unlocks this part of your brain that tells you this is what you got to do to accomplish what you're trying to achieve. Now, I don't mean to be preachy when I say this at all, so bear with me if I sound that way a little bit. One of the things I always taught my children is that if you say something like, well, I don't know how to do this, or I can't do this, or even now that they're young adults and they say, I can't afford this on things, I always discourage them from that way of thinking because I tell them once you say that to yourself, you've turned off that part of your brain that helps you figure out how you can accomplish that, how you can afford something, or how you can do this, or how you can accomplish your goal in mind. And so when you start thinking with the end in mind, and whether you're coming up with these compositions on your own or you've seen another picture like this and you want to try to accomplish a similar technique, when you start thinking with the end in mind, you start using that part of your brain that helps you solve those problems and figure out. And in the end, with most photographic problems, it's not that vexing. It's again, it's that wash, rinse, and repeat mentality. Almost every picture I took here was just kind of the same process each and every time. I was thinking about it. I was looking for a particular picture to talk about solving those photographic problems, but I think you get what I'm talking about. So as we go through all this, I know there's a few questions that popped up on the chat. Lee, I hope it got where you could finally see my slides. If it didn't, this is being recorded, so you'll be able to. I'll send out the recording later on today sometime, and so you'll be able to go back and look at that. And as I talk through all this, I think I'm right at the end with all this. It is about 2 minutes till 1 o'clock, which is perfect. Okay, yeah. Think with the end in mind. Even this next picture. Told everybody if we wait, because I saw that coyote, and this is a little bit of field craft I talked about in the last webinar, that once he gave that head cock, I knew he was about to jump. So I told everybody, be ready. And then shooting with the end in mind, hopefully he would jump. If he didn't, we got awesome pictures. If he did, we'd get even more awesome pictures. And so he jumped. Everybody was ready. We all got that shot. And then that's I can't remember. That's in the Costa Rica trip. That's with the frog. Same area as the frog was a while ago. And then this is a good example too. I forgot about this picture. Thinking with the end in mind. This was on our Moonlight Over the Prairie workshop back in early March. Uh, it was all about shooting landscapes under moonlight. We were fortunate enough during that workshop, we had a total lunar eclipse. And so with that in mind, we were taking pictures with the end in mind of all the phases of the lunar eclipse. That's just part of them I show there. And then how to overlay that on a good background. This is a composite image, by the way, if you don't know. But all of this was taken with the end shot in mind. We just, you know, knew what we were going to do in the beginning, knew all the shots we are going to put together, but did this shot with the end in mind. And with that, well, let me go past one more, then I'm going to turn this presentation off. Any questions? We'll save that for last, but let me say this before I go any further, before I turn this presentation off. Stay in touch, russell@russellgraves.com. I do always answer emails. Sometimes I get caught up and it takes me a few days to get to you, but I'll always go back through and answer them. I'm not going to say I haven't missed one or two every now and then, but I always make it an effort to answer your emails in the end. And so if you have any questions beyond this webinar, please feel free to stay in touch, and I'll do my best to answer your questions when you contact me. So with that said, let me stop the sharing. Oh, get back up to where we look like a dysfunctional Brady Bunch, where we can see everybody's face. And then let's see here. Uh, Joan says, see tulips. Let's see. John says I taught the apertures are really fractions. I think I did a video on this a couple weeks ago where the aperture where you get the it is fractions. You are right about that, John. But the way they determine aperture is they take the distance of the end element of the lens and divide it by focal length. That's how you get like f2.8 lens. And so 2.8 is the widest open, and then every time you step down, usually on what, depending on what the lens, the openings get smaller and smaller. Uh, yeah, everybody else is saying they see pictures on here. Van gave a good suggestion, but it's past that. Uh, Kim asked, do you have day workshops on the ranch? Occasionally I will, here on Hackberry Farm. We've got some big news hopefully coming up soon about Redlands Ranch. So I've got two different properties. I have Hackberry Farm, that's where I live, and then we've got land here. It's where we do it's where we do the hummingbirds, the fireflies, some night sky stuff, a little bit of wildlife photography, but the Redlands Ranch, that's more kind of hardcore wildlife photography. That's where I've got the blind in the ground, the water holes, all the animals come to that. It's to put that in perspective, where I live here on Hackberry Farm is in northeast Texas, and then Redlands Ranch is 250 miles straight west of here in northwest Texas. And so for now, with Redlands Ranch, I've just been doing the curated workshops where we organize a group and we go out there a couple times a year. But hopefully soon, once I get a few more things set up, that's going to open up pretty soon for just day workshops. But I've got a few hurdles to jump on that one to be able to get to that one. Uh, Exposure guidelines for backlit wildlife, but not silhouette. This is a question from Christine. In order to preserve some detail, like I said, try to shoot it against a dark background, Christine. Depending on how much detail you want in the subject, you might have to add exposure compensation plus add light to be able to bring some detail out. But with mirrorless cameras, what's ingenious about them is what you see is what you get. And so you can really kind of do that on the fly and be able to achieve the goals that you want to achieve. But usually what I do is start out, I shoot aperture priority almost all the time. And so when I'm shooting wildlife, I usually default to shooting at a wide open aperture like f4, f5.6. And then when I'm shooting backlit, I'll just look at the picture real quick and make a determination. Do I need to change anything? Do I need to add exposure compensation? And that's yes or no. Uh, yeah, even background colors look nice. And then Mary said, thanks, have to go. Thanks, Carolyn. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Christine says, any other day workshops at the ranch? I just answered that question. Uh, and then yeah, Tim, like I said, you'll get a recording later on today in the notes. Uh, and then Lee was able to see it again. Most of them are thanks for the presentation. Uh, Someone asked, I don't know this name, do you ever do black and white photos, landscapes for non-wildlife? If so, any suggestions? If you'll bear with me just for a second, I'll show you. Hang on. If it looks like I'm staring into space right now because I'm trying to pull up my website. The quick answer is yes, I do black and white occasionally. Now, in the past, let me go back to Zoom. And I'm going to share this with y'all if you care to see it. Here we go. In the past, I rarely ever did black and white. I'm starting to do more and more now, especially now that you can do infrared pretty easy. And there's a lot of it's just to try to expand my knowledge base and my skill sets. But in the past, I never really thought about black and white much. But for some reason, when I did my last Cowboys and Canyonlands workshop back in December, that whole thing in my mind looked black and white. And so I wanted to really a photojournalistic look at let me see if I can do this. Yeah, I'll just expand the pictures. I wanted a really photojournalistic look of, about what ranch life looks like in a contemporary day in black and white. And so with black and white, I think you do get away with being able to backlight pictures like this one because all the light's coming in from underneath that shed. In the end, the camera's telling you you're doing it wrong because all that bright area is just going to be a big blinky. It's going to say you're doing it wrong, but at that point, that's not important to the picture. What's important to the picture is the subject matter, and that's That's the young lady, and that's her dad behind it, and that's one of the little horses. Now, this is one thing here as I'm critiquing myself. I didn't watch my edge because this thing on the lower left has some little bubble sticking out there that I don't know what it is. It kind of bothers me now that I see it. But yeah, even this backlit, not the perfect time of day, which really lends itself, even in the middle of the day, lends itself good to black and white because at that point you're not worried about colors. You're looking at black and white. And again, you get away with these stark skies because, as I recall, when we took these pictures, we didn't have really good skies that morning. And so I just shot it all black and white. Black and white after the fact. I shot it in color, but black and white after the fact. And even a little bit of portrait work of that. By the way, I say young man, he's not a young man, he's in his 40s, but back when I was an ag teacher, I taught agriculture. He's one of my former students. And so him and his family are always gracious to let us spend a little time with them when we go out and do these Cowboys and Canyonland stuff. Just a Longhorn. Again, all these pictures, it's just this another one of my former students here, just husband and wife sitting in an old box car that they use for storage out on the ranch. And uh, I just thought it looked better in black and white in the end. And of all the pictures, that right there is my favorite for some reason. Cut off his nose, everything says composition's wrong, but I like the fact of all the drama with all the dust around his feet. And that's a backlit image. That's one of the reasons when we do that workshop, is I'll tell people we're going to get out of our comfort zone because I'm going to teach you how to shoot backlit pictures for to add a little bit of drama to your images. But yeah, as I shot this, I just thought it all looked better in black and white, and I think it looks better when you present it in kind of an editorial format like this. It all looks good when it's shown in black and white. So that's my thought there. Let me stop sharing. And then, like I said, if you got any questions, you'd rather just talk to me uh instead of show the or instead of adding in the chat, just feel free to turn off your microphone. Let's see.
Russell,
Thank you, Lynn.
do you ever shoot with an HDR?
Sometimes it depends on, if the scene calls for it. I don't overtly go out of my way to shoot HDR, but like one of those Acadia shots I showed in the presentation, at least was HDR because we had a really bright sky and a really darker foreground, and just to balance all that out, I had to shoot HDR. One of the one of the problems in this those fall workshops, and you can't do anything to control it, that we had was all the skies were just bright, and there was like clouds didn't exist from about September through November last year. Uh, so we barely got any clouds, and so it was all blue skies. So sometimes when you've got that big contrast in colors, you've got to use HDR.
I was thinking that shot you have of Cades Landing, that lane in Cades Landing where you had a lot of variations in shadows, and if that was an HDR shot.
No, that was just straight out of the camera. I exposed for the highlights or the where the bark was lit on the trees. That's what I exposed for, and let everything else kind of fall where it may. And then Carolyn says, color photographs capture clothes, black and white photographs capture souls. That's a good way of putting it, Carolyn. Nicely said. All right, any other questions from anybody? Well, good. I'll take that as a no one else has any questions. I appreciate you guys taking the time to join me today. Like I said, stay tuned. Uh, you will see well, a couple of quick announcements. Stay tuned. You'll see uh, I'll get this posted to a private YouTube link. I'll send it back out if you want to go back and watch it again. And then be looking out for, I'm going to do another webinar towards the end of the month because I'm about to launch my 2027 workshop schedule. If anybody's interested in going somewhere with us and going along, love to have you aboard on the trip. We have a lot of fun, learn a lot of good stuff, make lifelong friends, and just really enjoy our time together when we're afield. So anyway, with that said, stay tuned to that. And again, I appreciate everyone paying attention and joining me today, and I'll talk to everybody soon. Y'all take care.